And that's fun. It's fun to be with people who are constantly saying, well, like, what if we did this? Or what if we tried this? There's really no avenue you can go down that someone says, we'll give anything a shot once. And I think that in this space, it's a really fun place to be in for sure.
Podcast Junkies, episode 243. Welcome back. I'm your host, Harry Duran. If you're new to the show, it's the one where we search out interesting voices in podcasting, get them to kick back their heels and talk a bit about their shows or whatever else is on their mind in the world of podcasting. Last week, we spoke to Liz Gans. She's a reporter, journalism fellow at Stanford, and the product manager at Google. We got a sneak peek of what the team there is working on related to podcasting, and learned a lot about Liz's journey and how she ended up in her current position. Really fascinating stuff with some great podcast tips and takeaways. Make sure you check that out. Episode 242. Special thanks to our episode sponsor, Focusrite. Big fans of their 3G line of sound cards, and the Scarlett 2i2 has been my go-to for many, many years. I can't say enough good things about the quality and the craftsmanship of the Focusrite and Scarlett line. This month, there's a limited partnership that Focusrite has with Shure. They're offering an SM58 along with a Scarlett 2i2 and a pair of SRH 440 headphones at a discount with a few select dealers. Make sure you check out the link in the show notes where you can find the details of this Create and Cast bundle. This week, we speak to another social media influencer. It's Maura Hughes, and she is the social media manager for MeetEdgar. MeetEdgar is a very popular social media scheduling tool that I've been using for a long time, and it was founded by Laura Roeder, herself an inspiring entrepreneur. Maura is the host of MeetEdgar's Social Post podcast, and it's a show that provides social media marketing news, strategies, tactics, and tips for creators and small businesses. In this episode, we discuss best practices for creating engaging social content, the value of audio as a marketing medium, and the importance of listening to your audience's wants and needs. I was interested to hear the impact of COVID on the team and on the client base at Edgar, and we talked a little bit about that. And Maura shared the importance of making the podcast content relatable to your audience, which is a very key takeaway, and I think very relatable to this audience. She discusses how her approach to make podcasts better and best practices and tips for repurposing and sharing content. Lastly, we dive a little bit into what excites more about the future of marketing and podcasting specifically. So again, just like last week, lots of helpful and relevant tips related to promoting your podcast. As always, full show notes are available at podcastjunkies.com/243. If you enjoyed this episode or past episodes, I'd love it if you leave a rating and a review at ratethispodcast.com/podcastjunkies. This episode is also brought to you by Fullcast. If you're looking for help as a business with your podcast, we offer done-for-you services, coaching and consulting with our done-with-you services. And now we also have the Ultimate Podcast Dojo available. It's a new course and community designed to help you start your own podcast. Additional details at fullcast.co/dojo, DOJO. Make sure you stay to the end of the episode where I reveal this week's retention hashtag. Let's jump into this conversation with Maura. So Maura Hughes, host of MeetEdgar's Social Post podcast. Thank you for joining us on Podcast Junkies.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So where in the world are you in this age of, as of October 28th, we're recording this in the middle of a pandemic. So I'm always curious where people are hunkered down.
Yes. So I am in Arlington, Virginia, which is about 10 minutes outside of Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Been here since March. Haven't gone many places like most people, but it's okay because it's a good place to live.
You've been there since March because of COVID, or you just happened to move right?
Yeah, because I live here full time because of COVID. MeetEdgar is a fully remote company. So what's nice about MeetEdgar is if I wanted to, go see family in California for a month, I could do that and keep my normal job. But that's not what 2020 had in store. This year we're staying close to home base.
And I think everyone would do well to adopt a mindset that 2021 may not be that different. So I think the sooner we come to grips with that, I think just mentally we'll be better off. Because if anyone thinks anything's going to magically happen, and I think it's just human nature, like no one is ready to go to a conference with 3,000 people. Sorry, podcast movement, but
But luckily, there's always virtual. We can always,
Yeah.
especially in our space, it feels like you're always learning ways to connect with people no matter what.
Yeah. And so what's been the overall impact? And, we probably would need a separate podcast episode to talk about, people's experiences in COVID, but just what's been the experience for you this past year?
For me at MeetEdgar, as in the company, we, like many people, like many small businesses, we did see a drop around April and May when people really started to assess their finances, figure out we are a company that works with small business owners and entrepreneurs and freelancers. So, we did see a little bit of an impact. The thing that I think we found on a marketing side is people who are consuming content. We're seeing more downloads on the podcast. We're seeing more visits to the blog, more lead magnets people are picking up. So I think there's a hunger for people trying to, one, make the most of their time. And two, I think what you and I have known for years is that there's possibility on the internet. You can build a business on the internet by using your own skills. And this pandemic has made a lot of people think that way and start wondering, well, how can I take advantage of it? Which I think is a great thing. I think innovation that comes out of this hard time will be really fun and exciting to see.
Yeah, there's something about resilience. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Insert like cheeky quote in there, whatever gets you through the day. How long have you been on the MeetEdgar team?
So I've been with MeetEdgar for about 2 years. Before that, I worked for myself. So I was a freelancer. I did social media marketing, content marketing for small to medium-sized businesses, and I actually used Edgar. So it's kind of been just a journey of leading my way here, figuring out how to manage people on the internet and manage social media and help people learn that.
Talk a little bit about the culture, because MeetEdgar's been around. Laura's great. I saw her speak a couple of times. She's just a really accessible person, just really genuine in her story. I actually remember when Laura started the social media management tool, and it was with Google Sheets. And so I remember those early days. And then if I go back in my email somewhere, I can find the one where she said, I'm starting this tool. And so it's so much fun as an entrepreneur to see people have success and get an idea out, and then I know she gives kudos to her husband who has helped with like a lot of the software at the time. So that's a great founder story. So talk a little bit about how from your experience when you joined, what the culture there is like.
Yeah, absolutely. You are absolutely right. Laura is an entrepreneur's entrepreneur. For those of you who don't know, she had an info product business. She sold social media courses. She was teaching people how to use social media. She couldn't figure out a tool that worked for her. And so she happened to be married to a developer. And he said, I think I can build you what you need, which is how MeetEdgar came about. It was literally to solve Laura's problem. MeetEdgar is a fully remote company. We have been since the start. We always will be. Laura's actually in England. She's over in London. We're scattered all over North America. And we are a small team. We're a team of, I think we're at 12 now, but we're a small, scrappy team who we're constantly innovating. I think maybe because we were started by an entrepreneur and we are fully bootstrapped, we are constantly trying to think of new ways that we can work smarter, how we can, double up. We'll talk about that when we talk about social posts, about how we can be getting, the most out with the team that we have. And that's fun. It's fun to be with people who are constantly saying, well, like, what if we did this? Or what if we tried this? There's really no avenue you can go down that someone says, we'll give anything a shot once. And I think that in this space, it's a really fun place to be in for sure.
How has it been for you being the solopreneur and then coming in and now having like, your MeetEdgar family? And what's that been like for you personally?
You know what? It's actually been really nice. I think a lot of freelancers and solopreneurs can kind of, say that it can be a little lonely. I know you can build your network of people, and I highly recommend that everyone does. You find your fellow freelancers, you find people in the same industry as you, and you make those friends. But at the end of the day, you're the person who is making your business work. And when you have problems or you're scared about your business, like there's not too many people to talk about with. At MeetEdgar, it is nice to have just a team that we're all working for the same thing. We all want to make a better tool for our users. And that kind of collaboration and community is just really, really nice. You forget about that. I am the only person in the marketing department though, so I still have a little solopreneurness left in me. There's a little scrappiness. I have a lot of help for sure, but there is, I think every job you have, you kind of bring in the skills, especially the soft skills, to them. And if you're a freelancer or a solopreneur, you're learning so many soft skills right now that you will bring wherever you go in life.
Talk a little bit about your personal journey with the podcasting space.
Yeah. So our approach to podcasting is a little different. I love podcasts. I've been listening to podcasts since, I don't know, 2014, 2013. It's been a long journey. I listen to them all day long. And at MeetEdgar, we didn't have a podcast. Like I just said, we're a small team. We got to be smart about where we spend our time. But, last year, it became really evident that podcasting it's here to stay, and it's a great way to reach people. I'm sure you're like me. They're in your ears all day long. You're doing the dishes, you're driving to work or anywhere. I don't even listen to the radio anymore. So we had to get smart with how we wanted to do a podcast. And so our podcast social post is basically the way we upcycle our content. So we knew we were writing blogs every week. We were always going to do that. We were built on a blog, but that's great content that maybe someone didn't want to read, but they could listen to. So like most people listening to this, like you, I'm a huge podcast junkie, for lack of a better word. They are great. And if you're if you're a freelancer and you're spending a lot of time by yourself, it's so great to listen to other people. If you're an entrepreneur, there's so much you can learn. I remember listening to Lewis Howes' podcast like back in 2015 when I go on these runs. So podcasting for me has always been just a smart media, a smart way to get your message out there. But at MeetEdgar, we're a small team and we can't, just say, oh, let's just do a podcast and not think about, well, what's that going to do for our business? Or is it worth us taking that time? You have to be smart with how you're using the time. So around last year, we knew we wanted to do a podcast, but we didn't know the right way to go about it. So one of the things that we always preach is you have to maximize your content. You need to be smart about how you use your content because there's only one of you. There's only 24 hours in the day. So you can't just constantly be creating. So that was what we took into our podcast social post. We decided, well, why don't we just use this as an upcycle of existing content that we already have?
Yeah.
So that's where, I write blogs every single week and we just started reading the blogs. We do interviews for our YouTube channel. We started doing that, putting the interviews on the podcast. So we're getting double duty because some people don't like to watch YouTube or some people don't like to read blogs, but they like to listen to audio. And to me, I just think that's one of the best things about this whole space is you can make it whatever you want. I mean, you don't have to come up with something new every single time. You just have to find the format to put it into. And audio is a great format to be using right now.
And so are you leading the interviews, all the interviews that are on YouTube?
So that is my colleague, Megan. So she is on our CX team. Yeah, if you've been around MeetEdgar, you've probably seen Megan in a video. Yeah. She does all of our webinars. She's like the video queen. I don't love being on video. We're on it right now because I know it's not going to go anywhere, but she does all the video stuff. So she will, once we have that video clip of her interviewing someone for the YouTube channel, we'll take the audio, we'll put it into social post, we'll transcribe it for the blog. So we're really just getting double duty on it, or triple duty really at that point, trying to make the most of it. And it's fun. I love seeing that the way different people, consume their content. I love knowing that like different people on our blog that are listening to our podcast, like they might never have been to our website, but that's okay because they're still learning about us.
So to the extent that you know all the specifics about it, can you talk a little bit about what it was like getting the podcast set up? Because I know in the beginning, there's a lot of like moving parts and we produce. So obviously full disclaimer, like not only do I have Podcast Junkies, but I have a podcast agency called Fullcast where we produce shows for clients. Mm-hmm. And so I realized and I think new podcasters don't realize like how many steps there are required in starting a podcast. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there are more steps than I really thought, for sure. I think there's always a learning curve, and there was definitely a learning curve for us. We were fortunate at the time that we had someone on our team who was pretty savvy with podcasts, so he was able to kind of show us the ropes a little bit. But I think, we use Captivate for our podcast, and first time I ever got in there, I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to edit things. Like, I fumbled through so many recordings the first time I was, recording myself talking about the blog, and it's hard. And I think it's really humbling because if you've been doing something, I've been writing blogs for the longest time and I know how to write it, but then I I'd start talking and it was a mess. I mean, it would take me so long. It was crazy. It was crazy. I was like, this is not worth it. But it is, because then you start learning. And that's, same thing with editing. It's like, you don't really know how to edit in the beginning, I don't think. And it definitely takes some time. I think one of the funniest things I've ever done is if you listen to podcasts, like there's a couple podcasts that have been around for 5 years, 4 years. If you go back and you listen to the beginning, you're like, oh, most people were kind of stumbling around. You can see that audio will improve over time. I mean, everyone does it, and I'm sure you do because you've done it. You have to just evolve. I think everyone starts as a beginner, but for sure, really understanding, one, have proper equipment, have that mic, understand, test yourself a couple times, and then be willing to just be a beginner in it. YouTube and Google are your friends for sure.
And it's that beginner mindset, and also realizing that you're not going to know everything in the beginning. And even if you've been doing it, a year or 5 years, or we're getting to the point where podcasters have been podcasting for 10 years, right? So, but they all have, I think, whether they admit it or not, imposter syndrome and comparing yourself to others. I like to give the example of Pat Flynn. Every time he does a presentation, he'll occasionally mention his first podcast interview, first podcast episode, which he sat on for like a year. First, he recorded it and then he didn't do anything with it for like a year because he was just like so nervous. And if you listen to it, it has like heavy metal music on it. So like I think he thought that was cool or something. So it's and he just sounds like incredibly like awkward on it. So, but it's fun to hear as a new podcaster, because no podcaster that I know of likes the sound of their voice when they first started recording. So I think it's just, and it bears repeating because regular listeners will have heard this a lot of times, but I think, there's always the new person listening, and you should assume that you're not going to get it right the first time for the first few episodes. And you're just essentially finding like your sea legs, and you have to keep trying and find a rhythm that works for you.
Yeah. I love that you say that though, because I know the first time I ever listened to myself on audio, I was like, oh, well, that's what I sound like. Like it's a little jarring, to be honest with you. So it's kind of refreshing to hear like, oh, everyone kind of feels that way. It's not a natural thing to listen to your own voice through a recording. But yeah, I think you're so right. You got to stumble around a little bit, but no one is a natural. I mean, some people I think are natural interviewers, some people are natural editors, but no one has like the whole full podcasting thing. I don't think anyone's born with it. It wasn't a thing, for most of our lives. So figuring it out one step at a time, that is certainly the route we took.
Well, it's interesting because the only thing you could compare it to is radio. Mm-hmm. And so back in the days, radio was like, oh, you'd be in radio and that's how you would get the experience behind the mic. The other beauty about this show is that because it's a podcast about podcasting, I'm okay with like leaf blowers in the background because I'm just like, okay, like literally, like I want everyone who's a podcaster has had that moment where like the dog jumps into your lap, mm-hmm. or like the mailman comes in the middle of a podcast or FedEx comes. Yep. And so I love like kind of when I hear noise like that, because I'm like, okay, cool. I'm not NPR. I'm not trying to be like the perfect show. And it's reassuring for the listener to just know like, okay, like, we it's like the duck on the pond, like super mm-hmm. calm at the top, but underneath, like the legs are like going like this.
That's exactly
right. And every podcaster's got their like, they always say, they call it business up top, party down below, because mm-hmm. they've got their collared shirt or their nice blouse, but they're wearing like boxers on like while they're on these like Zoom calls and these podcast interviews.
Which everyone is familiar with now. At some points, everyone has done that in the last 6 months for sure.
And then what you have to make sure is like you don't get up in the middle of your call. You're
Turn
just
your
like,
camera off. That's an important lesson for everyone. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just, and I think you may have discovered this as well. People are searching for human connection, mm-hmm. and so genuineness. A couple of like flubs along the way just endears you to your listener and makes it feel like, in probably the same way in terms of how you address topics, like letting people know, like, this show is not just for experts only, mm-hmm. right? And so can you talk a little bit about how you think about the topics that you talk about in a way that's relatable?
Yeah. We are really lucky that we have a huge community. Our users are fantastic. They ask us questions. They give us ideas. They tell us what they want to know. And that's where I base all of our content planning off of, whether it's for the podcast or an email or anything. It's really listening to it's not what I need and it's not what I think I should be saying. It's really what I'm hearing from our community. I think if you're a content creator of any type, if you're a podcaster, you should always listen. Like, what does your audience want? I mean, they're the commodity. They are the ones who are going to help you be better, because if you answer a question for them, they'll share it with their people. And it's a lot easier, I think, once you start kind of building that community, whether it's on social media, whether you have an email list, really starting to listen to what people have to say, to listen to the questions they're asking you, or just asking them questions, what do you guys want to hear? What are you working on right now? I mean, we love to ask our audience those things, because that way I know, okay, the people who love us, I'm going to talk to them, and they'll end up attracting others, but you're not going to be for everyone. We're kind of across the board. We have some people, they are beginners. They haven't even launched yet. We have other people like yourself in our community who have, they've been around and they know the tricks. So there is a little bit of balance, but I constantly go back to, what does my community want to hear? What are they telling me they want to hear? And then we go from there.
Speaking of the community, are there any names that come to mind? Because we always, on my show, like I can think of super fans' names. I think of folks like Susie and Patrick, and like I always go to them because they're just the ones that like engage a lot with my audience. So I'm wondering if you're thinking about long-time MeetEdgar users or people that you've connected with in the community.
Yeah, we definitely have some people who have been with us from the beginning, who have been with us since year one, who followed Laura even before that. And I love that, I love knowing, like Jenna has been around forever. And those are the kind of people that it's fun because they grow with your business. And sometimes, they'll share screenshots of what the Edgar used to look like. And it's just funny. That's kind of what I think podcasting is, again, I'm going to use this word again, but it's a community, right? Like, we're all trying to create community. You're not just trying to get listeners. You're trying to get people who support you and believe in you. And what's nice about that, especially in this medium, is we're talking one-on-one. It's very intimate, right? And so if someone's listening to this, it's coming straight into their ears. It's very intimate. So they feel like they know you, Harry. Like, your audience knows you and they support you. And this is a really good lesson, I think, that I learned from Laura. If you build that community and you listen to them and you give them content they want, they will follow you through all different, iterations of your career. Laura's on her third business now, and she still has people who bought her social media courses, signed up for MeetEdgar, and now they're using her new paper belt because they feel like they know her and they believe in her and they root for her. And I think that's what a lot of us do on our podcast is people want to know you and they want to cheer for you.
What's the new project Laura's working on?
It is called Paperbell. So it's a site for coaches to kind of book and sell their packages.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
We'll make sure we have a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. How
do you think about ideas on how to make the podcast better?
Oh, man. What a great question. There are so many ways. For our podcast social posts, there's so many things we could be doing, I know, that would get it better. And again, another great lesson. If you work on a small team or if it's just you, you have to be patient. You have to know you're playing a long game, which is how I feel about our podcast. I don't have to do everything right away. I would love to have more conversational things on there. I would love to have more of our team on there. I'd love to have Laura featured more on there. There's so many content ideas, I think, when it comes to a podcast. We could definitely finesse our promotion strategy a little more. We're actually working on that right now. So that's been a big thing of, well, now that we have this podcast, how are we going to keep getting it out to people? What do we need to be doing with our guests? Those types of things. The list is very long and in short. But again, like I said, when I think of our podcast, and maybe a lot of other people do, it's not our sole business. So just getting the downloads and just getting the subscribers isn't always the metric I need to look at. I always need to know, well, how does this connect back to growing the brand and growing the users of MeetEdgar? So when I prioritize things, I tend to prioritize it like that. So right now the promotion strategy is taking front and center because, well, if I get my podcast in more people's ears, then they're going to know more about MeetEdgar. And that's raising the brand awareness, which is one of our key objectives. So that's how I think about prioritizing. I think if you're creative, you're always I would actually love to know from you, there's got to be a million things that you always want to do. There's never no shortage of ideas, I'm assuming.
No, I think it's just people think there's a magic bullet for how to get a podcast found like everywhere. Like, what do I need? What's the thing I need to do? And I'm like, how much time do you have? And, how much ink is in that pen? Because I'm going to give you probably like 100 things to try. And for some people, some things will resonate more with others. So I could give the same list of 100 tips to someone and, the first 20 would work better than like for someone else, the last 20, because it's like, where's your strengths? Like if you're an outgoing personality, maybe you can do like an Instagram story to say, hey guys, my new episode is out. Like go check on it. And like, I always say like, some people are prolific writers, like they can write 3,000 word blog posts, and that's why they're blogging every week, or they have a Substack newsletter. Some people are comfortable in front of a camera, and they can, this. I don't know how they do it personally, but they can show up every day on an Instagram live and like with a different outfit, and like I'm just like. I don't I just, maybe it's a sign of my age. I just recently turned 50. So I'm just like, I don't know. It feels like I just can't and then TikTok is just like, there's other platforms. There's just like, so where's your strengths? Yep. And some people just like talking. And that's why I think I early on gravitated towards podcasting, because it's like, you don't have to have camera on and you can just talk. And I like having, I like the medium of, I like interview based specifically, because solo is also its own beast, because you have to like think about what to say and you feel like you're talking into space and you're just like, is anybody listening? And so I just love the dynamic of having someone to work off of and just being able to relate to the person and see what, it helps me be more attentive. It helps me like work the curiosity muscle and saying like, I just want to learn about this person. And then I always, I ad nauseum remind the listeners, there's 3 people in the room for every conversation. It's the host, the guest, and the listener.
And the listener. That's a great point. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, when it comes to like promoting, especially like our podcast social post, that's our big thing right now. We're figuring out different ways we can promote it. That's a great marketing point. There's no silver bullet. Like I know people want to hear it, and it just doesn't exist. There's so many things you can try, and you really got to figure out, lean into your strengths and also what the people are telling you. You're going to be able to know if you really like Instagram, great. Make sure your audience is also on Instagram. They probably will be if, they like you already and they're already following you. But I think for people who go in cold and who start a podcast and they want a huge audience, like you got to grow little by little and follow them. Like it's like breadcrumbs almost. Yeah.
And also realizing that people have a platform that they're comfortable like residing in or spending their time. The people that spend their time on Twitter are different than the people that love being on Instagram, and that are different than the people who like watching YouTube videos and are different than the people who like reading. So I always say, it's hard to think about, but try to have at least a presence. You don't have to be like active in all those, but at least post your content on each of those platforms at least once when an episode goes live. So to that, natural segue into the scheduling
so I'd say we have a perfect tool for that.
So can you talk about how you think about, especially for solopreneurs, like we're trying to do so much, so why not use a tool like MeetEdgar to help with the heavy lifting and think, how can I make myself look like I'm available and I'm scheduling at different times? So I'd love for you to share some of the best practices when you think about, repurposing and sharing content.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of like tenets of Edgar that we totally believe that I think everyone should think about. So the first one is this idea of when you come up with content, you don't need to think, well, I need to post Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Like that you're just going to be in a constant cycle if that's how you're thinking about like, well, I have to just come up with 5 posts for the week. Instead, think about the things you want to be known for, the topics that you excel in, and make those, we call them categories. People call them topics, there's all types of words for them. I'll just use categories. So your categories are your expertise. So for you, it would be promoting your podcast, obviously, maybe, promoting your other company, and maybe one is quotes from all the people you've had on this podcast. And then another might just be sharing other people's podcasts. So those are 4 different categories of content that you have. And the more you share them, the more you become known for those things, right? So we have a category that shares our blog posts. That's our blog post category. But we also have a category that shares Laura quotes, because Laura is a huge part of MeetEdgar. She's a huge part of the draw for us. So you have to think like, well, what are the things I talk about all the time? Or what are the things I want to make sure my audience knows I'm doing? And that's how you can build your schedule. So it's not thinking time-based, it's thinking topic and category based. Because if you start thinking like that, then you're just going to build up a library of content that makes you seem like an expert in all these different areas. So building your schedule, not based on time, but based on these categories. And then also not being afraid to reshare things. Now, you have a podcast, so you probably know this. You could share this podcast one time and 5 people would see it. Because algorithms are nuts. They make no sense these days. Yeah. People are busy. People are trying to cut back on their social media. Everyone's on a different time schedule. If you're only sharing something one time, whether it's your newest podcast episode or a deal that you want, a sale that you're having, you're really doing yourself a disservice. And lots of people are scared that they're going to be just salesy and like repetitive. Or like spamming. Yeah. And it's like, well, think about like, you can promote the same thing, but do it in different ways. So when you tell a story, if you have like a favorite story that you love to tell, like how you met your partner or, found the time you found like your dog, you probably don't tell the story the exact same way every time. It's the same thing with social media. Like you can promote your podcast episode with the link to the podcast, or you could use like an audiogram of us talking, or you could use an image of us, of me or you, or, you could use the part of the video. And that's 4 different ways that you can get your podcast, you can share it, that doesn't feel repeated, like it doesn't feel spammy and repetitive.
And also, I think when Twitter cut down a couple of years ago on repetitive text, like that was a big wake-up moment for everyone, because they were just putting the same exact copy, sending it out like 5 times a week, 5 times a day, for the whole week, and then Twitter's like, like you can't do that anymore. So, and I think Edgar started. I know you guys had to, like every other scheduling tool, they're like, we got to figure something out here. And then you allowed the ability to sort of recycle and refresh and kind of play around with the words, which I thought was pretty cool. Yeah.
So we call creating variations. So again, like your stuff is not going to be seen by everyone in your audience the first time you post it. And that's okay. That's the point of social media. What you can do is rely on your category so you're not posting the same thing back to back to back. Instead, you're mixing it up and sharing a little bit of everything. But then you are resharing the most important content that you want out there. Don't be afraid to post your older episodes, you should always be reposting. Like, even if they are, that to our point earlier, you might sound, the audio might be not as great, but your audience is constantly growing. So if someone just started following you yesterday, they don't know what you did 6 months ago. Don't deny them that opportunity to listen. Instead, just reshare it.
These are a little painful for me sometimes because it's like the cobbler's kids always have the crappiest shoes, because I'm just like, man, I know you're right. And I know I should be doing that. So sometimes I get into these waves. I'm like, yes, there was a point where I was taking older episodes and I was adding like a black and white old timey filter and like Throwback Thursday, and I was sharing those, and I think I had them scheduled in Edgar as well. So every Thursday it would pull, because I call it the hopper.
Yep.
Like it just pulls from the hopper and just like every Thursday, like to get a couple of those in there. And I think now, because I'm at 240 episodes, I probably have to pull more every Thursday than just one, or else I'll never get caught up. But an idea that I had is when you produce a podcast episode, create your graphic for that episode, but go ahead and create your Throwback Thursday version of it now.
Yes.
And go into Edgar and schedule it 6 months from now, like on it. And like, and so I was like, because I'm always like, how can we do more with, with scheduling tools and like using the tools to their advantage? So I think I need to revisit other ways that I can put those best practices into use in a way that doesn't make it more work. If you do planning ahead of time, this is something probably you guys preach, but if you do more planning ahead of time on how you want it to appear, you can appear to be like really active on social, with very little work and just a little bit more planning.
Yeah. I mean, it's just really what works best for you. I will tell you the nice thing about Edgar is we keep all of your your posts. So all of the content you create, you put into Edgar, it lives in your library. You can edit it, you can add to it, and then you can put it back into your schedule. So to your point, when you want to go back and add some more variations or mix up the images or videos or whatever, they're all in there already. But yeah, I mean, guys, I think that's one of the things you do need to think about. Like, I know a lot of people don't want to do scheduling because they're afraid that platforms don't like it, which is not true. Platforms love scheduling. There's no decrease in reach or anything when you use scheduling tools. What it is it's being smart with your time. And if you plan out your content and you think, I'm going to use these categories, I'm not going to be afraid to reshare older things, so I'm making sure I'm posting at least once a day, you put everything into Edgar, you turn Edgar on, and he handles the rest, you've saved yourself, 10 to 20 minutes every day? My advice to everyone is use that 10 to 20 minutes to go into social media and actually engage with your audience. Look at who commented, look at who liked, look at who is retweeting your stuff, start some, conversations with them, because that's the power. So if you're spending your time engaging, Edgar's spending his time sharing your content, then it's a 1-2 punch without any extra time. And that's where it gets really, really cool. And people are like, this person's always on social. How are they doing any podcast? Because they're just on social all the time. They were just chatting to me an hour ago and they just shared a bunch of stuff, 10 minutes ago. That's how it works. And you don't have to just keep Twitter open all day long, which can be a time suck for sure.
It's so funny because you mentioned schedule it in Edgar and Edgar will go do the work for you, which is a reference to your mascot. What's his name?
Edgar's an octopus. His name is Edgar.
Edgar. So I have to ask if you've seen the Netflix special, The Octopus Teacher.
No, I haven't, but a few people on the team have. So I think I need to check it out. Octopi are very fascinating creatures.
Oh my God. I'm convinced they're aliens.
They do kind of look like it.
Super intelligent. And if you see some of these YouTube videos where they're climbing out of
they climb out with, Ugh.
I can't, my girlfriend's convinced me, but that's why I don't eat them anymore, because I just because I'm we're pescatarians now. And so now we're trying to wean our way off the red meat, obviously. And so just on fish, but even an octopus, I'm I can't. And then after you watch that movie, you definitely won't be able to. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. I will definitely check that out.
They're so beautiful. They're so beautiful and they're so smart. So yeah. Shout out to the octopus.
Yeah. They're amazing. Yeah, and now once you listen to this, you'll just see and hear octopi everywhere. Once I started working at Edgar, I was like, God, people talk about octopi a lot.
Yeah, it's probably a podcast about that.
Please, there always is.
When you think about, this is so important I talk about it as the life of a tweet. Mm-hmm. When we promote shows for clients, we post it at least five times during the week. So the day the episode goes live, and then the 5 times Monday through Friday. Yep. Because I tell people, just a tweet with text, it's probably a waste of time. It's so fast. It's just this waterfall of tweets. Yeah. And if you think someone's going to magically see that text, unless they follow very few people, because if you're following any number of people, you're going to see a lot. So I like using lists in Twitter, so that I can see people that I follow, which is really, it kind of helps to categorize my stream. But then also, so better than that would be a graphic with a tweet. Yeah. Next step would be an audiogram. And the next step would be audiogram with captions.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's so many different ways you can do it. And, I think the thing is just always be experimenting. If you want to be in marketing and if you want to do social media, you have to be open to the fact that some things are going to do better than others. And that's okay. And that's super normal. And what you can do is then look back and say oh, well, why did it do better? Is it because I just posted the link and people could click it easily? Or is it because I posted an image and people noticed it more? Just really being willing to experiment, and don't be afraid that people are just going to hate you. Your community loves you. And
you're overthinking.
If they see something twice, they're not going to bother about it. They're just not going to click it this time. I mean, that's really gets to the heart of it.
And you're finding them where they're at. So I tell people, when I promote an episode, I literally post it on our Facebook group, my Facebook page, my Twitter account, my LinkedIn company page for the podcast that I've created, my personal LinkedIn page. I send them, I mention it in my newsletter, and Instagram. And so we also create a Medium post, and I post it on YouTube. And so it's just and you think well, I'm bombarding people. It's a little bit of an ego check, because the reality is people are not waiting for you to release a podcast episode. Sorry to tell you that. They're not just sitting there I can't wait till Maura releases something. I'm just anxiously waiting to see what she's. You just have to catch them in that moment, because we're all. I see it myself. Even podcasts that I want to listen to, I don't necessarily see when they publish a new episode. So I see it in their newsletter, or I see that they mentioned it in a tweet. I'm like, oh, okay. So to your point, like use Edgar's many tentacles to like make you available. So to that point, which are, for those that are new to Edgar, which are the platforms that you can post on?
Facebook, which includes Facebook groups, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Pinterest. Yes.
And Pinterest is relatively new. What are you seeing there in terms of how people are using it?
So we just launched Pinterest a couple of months ago. We worked with the Pinterest team to build this integration, and Pinterest is a huge opportunity for everyone. I think it's very untapped right now. One of the things we're seeing actually a lot is video pins, which includes audiograms, do very well. Pinterest really likes them. They do very well in the algorithm. So promoting your podcast on Pinterest makes perfect sense. Pinterest people are looking for something specific. They're looking either how to, or they're looking to plan something. They are planning in advance and they need information. So if you have a podcast episode that's about, doing your Black Friday sale, or I don't know, it could be anything. Like people are probably looking on Pinterest for that stuff. It's a very much a search engine-y type platform, which is important to think about. For content marketers, it's a huge opportunity for sure.
And then you would just put the link to either your subscription link or your website link in the pin, so that when people see it, it's been a while since I've been in there, but you can redirect people. Yeah,
so you definitely need a link to whatever you want, whether it's like your page for an episode or a page for, your product or your blog or whatever. You need a link to send something. So that's how Pinterest, if you think about it, like Facebook doesn't like people leaving their site, so they don't really like links. Pinterest wants people to leave their site. They really want people to find pins and get off their site and go somewhere else. So if you are trying to get more awareness to your website, more traffic, more subscribers, things like that, like you definitely want to be experimenting with Pinterest and seeing how it can work for you, because it's not just for fashion and, recipes is what a lot of people think. It's grown so much, and Pinterest is really, really working they want their people to be successful on there. They want you to be on Pinterest and to see traffic from Pinterest. So they're going to teach you all the best ways, which I think is great. And, not every platform does that, as we all know.
Yeah, that's an important distinction, because Facebook rewards, and LinkedIn, they reward people for keeping them on the platform. And I think that Pinterest was born out of a curation site for pointing people outside to like, oh, look at this cool thing. And then here's where you would go to buy it. And look at this cool thing. Here's where you would go to consume it. So that's an important distinction that I think people sometimes forget.
Yeah, absolutely. And on Pinterest, you're not competing with people doing their own personal stuff. So like when you're on Instagram, you're competing with, your friend's cute baby, or, somebody's puppy, or you're competing against people's personal needs. And on Pinterest, that's not a thing. They're there looking for information. So
it's not like a social.
It's not. They don't think of themselves as a social platform.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. No one's going to Pinterest and saying, I'm drinking my coffee this morning.
Here's a picture of my cocktail or whatever. Yeah, exactly.
Very good point.
Yeah.
Those are very, very helpful tips. I think we're going to make sure I revisit and check out what we're doing for this show and for our client shows as well. Just kind of leverage the tools to their best capacity.
Yep. And the life of a pin is much longer than the life of anything else. One last thing. So you can pin it today and still see traffic in 6 months, which is amazing.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get on that.
All right. I'm off my Pinterest spiel.
What has you excited, either from a marketing perspective or podcast perspective, when you think about the upcoming or next year, in terms of planning?
Oh, man.
Just put your marketing hat on now.
Gosh, so many things. I think from a marketing perspective, people this year have had their worlds rocked, and they are open to a lot more things. And I think that's a great thing for any type of marketer. People want community. They want reassurance. They want to feel good. They want things that make them feel good. They want things that, let them know that like there is a brighter day coming. And if you're a marketer, that's great, because you can experiment with so many different things of pulling people in and building that community using social. People are using social in a smarter way now, and they're going to be very picky about who they let in their feeds. And it's not going to be just anybody. It's going to be the people that make them feel good and that teach them something, that make them laugh, that give them some type of value. So think about that. Think about the content. Like we always say, be very intentional with your content. Think about what you're putting out there. I think we're moving more in that direction of intentional content creation, intentional marketing. Like people are closing down all types of things. They don't want to be on Facebook. They don't want to follow just anyone.
Yeah.
They want to follow people for a reason. So that I think is one thing. Podcasting, honestly, the world just seems brighter and brighter every time I think of podcasting. Like what I love about podcasting is there is no ceiling. You just said earlier, there could be a podcast for octopus. Like, I hope there is. And I bet they have a huge niche following. Like,
oh yeah.
And that to me is the exciting thing, is that podcasting is growing and more people are leaning on it and more people are learning about it. Bigger brands are getting into podcasting. And you don't have, like, if you think about it, like, I know there are like limited series podcasts. How cool is that you can be like, let me do a limited series podcast because I don't want to commit to doing it, but twice a year, I want to teach my people something new and do something for 6 weeks.
I like to think of it as I call it like an audio brochure. Like because some people get a little stressed out. They're like, oh, I got a podcast like forever. I'm like, no, just do 8-part series. And then if you want to send people to your stuff, send them to like the 8-part series of your podcast. And it's evergreen. If you make the content evergreen, it'll be there forever, and whether they find it tomorrow or 3 years from now.
I love that. I love that so much. I just think audio as a medium is becoming more mainstream, and when that happens, the more fun things people start doing and experimenting with it. And I think that I'm excited to kind of see how that grows in this industry.
Very good. So a couple of questions as we wrap up. What's something you've changed your mind about recently?
Oh, gosh. That's a hard question. This is silly, but it's a TV show on Netflix.
Okay.
And it was called The Haunting of Bly Manor. And I didn't want to watch it because I thought it would just be scary, but there's actually like a bigger storyline. So I totally changed my tune around that. Yeah, it is scary, but it's not just like a horror thing.
Not gory scary.
Yeah, exactly. There's more to it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, because I've seen it. I do not like and do not understand horror movies. Especially the bloody ones. Like I grew up in the days of like Halloween and Jason and like, it's kind of scary, but like now they're like overtly like gory, and I just don't like that. And then the whole true crime wave in podcasting is also disturbing. Like there's so that's probably a topic for another podcast discussion. But yeah, I'll give that a shot. And I like asking that question because it doesn't have to be podcast or marketing related.
It's a good question.
So it's whatever top of mind.
Yeah.
And what's the most misunderstood thing about you?
About me?
Yeah.
Oh, more good questions. I am very introverted. So I think people tend to think when they meet me that I'm just really shy or I'm not really interested, but I'm sure lots of people listening are probably introverts as well. It's like actually the opposite. Like I'm just shy usually because I just want to hear what you have to say, which is why this is different. I'm not used to being asked so many questions, but yeah, I think being an introvert, you got to get a lay of the land and then you let yourself come out a little. So people are always surprised when they meet me a few times, like, oh, you're actually way chattier than I thought. It's like, no, I just had to get used to you.
Yeah, so funny. And I think what I find is that I'm really extroverted. I think I've heard the term socially extroverted.
Oh, wow.
Which is basically like where you're in social settings, you look like you're a total extrovert. But then when the conference is done and you're back home, you're just like back in the cave and just like, okay, like I need a break from people. And so I find that to be a case with a lot of people as well.
Yeah, you need that downtime for sure.
Yeah. Well, Maura, the time flew by. Thank you so much for opening up, sharing your story. I think it's relatable always to people to hear origin stories, like how you got to where you got to, and especially with what you're doing at MeetEdgar. I've been a fan of Laura's since the beginning. I can actually say from the very beginning, pre-Edgar. And so it's exciting to see that she's continuing to build that sense of community and family within the team as well, and just continuing to root for what you're doing. And I'm glad we got that opportunity to get a peek behind the curtain of what you guys are working on.
Yeah, it was great to be on. It was great chatting with you. I will chat podcasts with you any day of the week. So thank you so much.
And if you think of anything else related specifically to podcasts, I think what we shared here is relatable to anyone who's posting content, and specifically for anyone who's promoting podcast episodes as well. So we'll make sure we provide all the links in the show notes. And then where's the best place for folks to go to learn more about the podcast, Edgar, or you?
So on the podcast is Social Post. Post. We are on Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on all the big ones to share to learn about MeetEdgar. find us at meetedgar.com, and we're at MeetEdgar on all the social sites, every single one. And for me, you can find me through MeetEdgar because I manage all of the accounts. So you can always DM us in and you will be talking to me. So feel free to say, hey, Maura.
Well, thanks again, Maura. Appreciate you taking the time. Hope you have a fantastic day.
Thank you. All right, you too.
Thanks again to Maura for coming on the show. Always appreciated. Full show notes available at podcastjunkies.com/243. Intro and outro music composed by Cedar and Soil. cedarsoil.com for his list of amazing music. Tune in next week for my conversation with Russ Johns, host of Pirate Broadcast. Don't forget to check out our sponsor, Focusrite, and their awesome line of gear, specifically the 2i2 Pro. podcastjunkies.com/Focusrite. Podcast production and marketing provided by Fullcast. Sign up for a free podcast brainstorm at fullcast.co/chat15. And if you've made it this far, no doubt you're looking for this week's retention hashtag. Let's go with Meet Maura. That's MEETMAURA. And you can tag Maura at Maura425 on Twitter and us at podcast_junkies. Thanks for all you do to support the show. Talk to you next week.